initial message that I got was, yeah, he's headed back home. He's going to move to Minnesota. And I was just, just crestfallen. So that's when I said, I got to get him in here one last time. Well, I think that we're going to have him around for a little while.
Slow down a little.
And so this may not be, and I know it's not going to be the last time that Craig will, be here with us to enlighten us on some topic. So I'm going to zip it and turn it over to Craig Hensley.
All right.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So first of all, it's nice to be here. I remember giving presentations here a long, long time ago when I was at Guadalupe River State Park. So it's always nice to come back up here. So what I want to try to do today, I got to give you one caveat about my yard, our yard. We bought a small house, as you'll see, across from Cibolo Creek and down in Bernie, and there's not a rock on the place. You can go down 14 inches before you hit clay, and there's just not a rock, other than if someone was brought in. So I'm cheating, because a lot of you live up here and in the hill country, and you're dealing with rocks constantly. So, but I will also say that our yard is primarily shade, so that presents its own challenges, because a lot of the plants that we see around here like the sun and the heat. But we've been pretty fortunate. So, but before we get started, what I'd like to do is just ask, what do you want to try to get out of today? So if somebody a couple of people could offer up what you'd like to have happen. It's not like I can change the presentation, but I can change what I say or re-emphasize some things what I say. But what do you all hope to get out of this today? Or are you just in out of the heat?
I'd like to know what plants would feed the birds.
Okay, we can talk about that. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm having trouble with bird feeders.
What is a good bird feeder?
Bird feeder.
Okay. Well, there's a guy that works in his bird store right down the store that would probably fill you with an hour's worth of that information. But we can talk about that too. I don't think there's any pictures of bird feeders in here, but we can talk about that stuff. So I want to kind of show you what we got and how we transformed it, and what the benefit of that transformation has been, because one of the things we did was try to document what was happening. Because one of the things I've always believed, if you're going to go in and make those kind of changes, shouldn't you actually be able to go out and enjoy and what actually does happen, who comes? It's kind of like that old movie, if you build it, they will come. And we've had some of that, so we're real fortunate with that. So, but I've spent a lot of time feeding birds and doing things like that too. So we'll try to address everything, and don't hesitate to ask a question whenever you have one during the presentation. Can we darken these lights and it won't affect the camera thing too much? Okay, perfect. So to begin with, let's see, I guess I should turn the power on maybe. Let's see here, there we go, there we go. So one of the things that I've spent a lot of my career on in work and not in work is talking about pollinators and pollination and the challenges that they face. And so the reason that I got into native plants was because of that need for those pollinators, because pollinators are attached to us as much as we're attached to them, in terms of they depend on us not tearing everything apart, and we depend on them if we want to go to the grocery store and buy apples and oranges and all of those fruits that we get to enjoy. It's because of the pollinators. And granted, a lot of it is honeybees, which aren't native to the United States, but they're still pollinators along with the thousands of other species that pollinate our wildflowers and our food. But there are a lot of issues. Obviously, habitat fragmentation. We're going to start with the negative slide and then try to build back up, okay? Habitat fragmentation and just outright habitat loss, like what you just described in that little letter. Loss of natural diversity. So even if the place is there, you're seeing losses in diversity of flora, which then creates losses in diversity of fauna because one follows the other. Diseases, pathogens, non-native competing species has really become a major problem, particularly here in Texas, but across the country. My daughter lives out in the Boston area, and when I go out there, mostly what I see are invasive plants. A lot of their natives are just flat gone. They've been around a lot longer out there, altering the landscape, of course. Some of our agricultural practices cause those issues: pollution, climate change. Nothing here that you haven't seen before, whether you believe it or not, it's true. Lawn chemicals and pesticides are one of the biggest challenges that we have, especially at the local level. I saw a research paper recently where they took they were able to work with people that used chemicals in their lawn and then adjacent to people that didn't. And they put out these little plastic things because they take, if you're spraying out there, the drift of the spray will land on those little plastic bracelets, basically. And they did find that a lot of the people that spray in their yard don't think their stuff goes to the other yards. It does. So it's not like you can't just draw a box around it and go, okay, well, it's not affecting anybody else, so leave me alone. It actually is affecting all of us. Another big one that's popped up here in the last few years, especially when around native plants, is nativars or cultivars. Nativars is just a silly word for cultivar to try to make it sound like it's good. A lot of our cultivars of our native plants, when you make cultivars, when you take the native actual plant and you start to change it because you want bigger, brighter flowers or various things like that, bigger leaves, change the color of the leaves, you're always going to sacrifice things like the amount of nectar, the amount of pollen, color of the flower, the size of the flower, those kinds of things. So that's another challenge that's becoming more and more obvious. And it's limited research yet, but some of the limited research is showing that a lot of our cultivars are not as good for pollinators as the actual, honest-to-God, real plant that hasn't been genetically modified. Now, that's not to say every plant, but it's becoming, there's a lot more attention being paid to that. And then just the antiquated ways that we manage our lawns. We're still got this European blood in us that thinks a green lawn mowed to 2 inches tall is actually pretty. And so a lot of people's eyes, it's pretty. To me, it's a biological desert. And it really is a biological desert. It has no value to the natural world around you. And so other than the fact that you're mowing, which is putting pollutants in the air, making a lot of noise that's unnecessary, and then killing off anything besides your green lawn, you're not doing anything for the natural world. And so now that I'm retired from Texas Parks and Wildlife, I can kind of say what I think. So I apologize if I irritate anybody. But it's really true. And this is what we've gotten used to. These typical lawns where everything's mowed to nothing. Here's a brand new housing development in Bernie. They give them 2 trees and a couple of non-native shrubs and call it good. And they move on to the next house and they do the exact same thing. There's very little biological diversity in any of these scenes, and thus they're not going to have insects. They're not going to have birds. They're not going to have a lot of that stuff, unfortunately. Then we even get these places where they fix them up and they go, well, isn't that nice? It's a lovely entrance to a housing development. But then when you start looking, there's nothing of any value to wildlife here, where you could put nice, beautiful wildflowers with different colors. Same thing up there. It looks nice because it's green, but does it have value for the natural world? And again, some people will go, who cares? But we should care. We absolutely should care. And then we've got all this lawn. This is at the city parks in Bernie, and some agricultural field next to the YMCA. Or not ag field, it's just a field that they go out and they mow. A lot of wasted space here. We could be doing something for wildlife to benefit. And we all know that if we have wildlife, we have a better quality of life. At least that's what I found. But we can do things. These are other yards in Bernie. Here's a street corner that's got all kinds of natives. That is habitat, right? It's not very big, but it's habitat. Same thing here. They've got their big privacy fence here, but even on the outside of the privacy fence, they lined the street with all kinds of beautiful flowers. And then I have to give a plug for the NIPSOT. Was it NIPSOT, Terry? PGARP, Pollinator Garden folks. They've had this old concrete thing, and it was full of soil and nothing else. They went in and they put native plants. So it doesn't have to be huge. You can do small things to make a big difference. And so I show you that because then I'm going to get to our house. So about 7 years ago, when Terry Lashley, my wife back there in the corner, who's been very patient with me and this yard, has been lovely with it. We bought this little house in Bernie. It's on 0.23 acres. You can see the front yard. There's not a native thing. There were 3 Texas sotals. They were native. Nothing else in that yard is native. The backyard, we weren't living in South Texas, so I didn't feel like those were really appropriate. All of our trees are pecan, but not the pecan that's the native pecan. But we do have a lot of squirrels. So they apparently like those pecans anyway. So that's kind of what we inherited when we bought the house. And so it had, St. Augustine grass, it had nandina, olive, boxwood, magnolia, ligustrum, sago, and other palms. It had purple heart, liriope, vinca, Asiatic dayflower, and garlic. Of this was a biological desert, plain and simple. The roaches did like the palms. When we cut those palms down, which by the way is really hard to do, every roach in God's green earth was coming out of those things. So it's kind of nasty. It wasn't the ones that live in your house, so it was a native roach, I think, but still it was nasty because it was a roach. So some people would look at this and go, oh, that's beautiful. Wow, look at that. Well, we didn't think it was. And so some of the problems we had is we had invasive plants. We had no understory. We had no shrub layer. We have a sterile ground layer. So we knew we had our work cut out for us. We had a lot to do here. But the nice thing was, again, very small yard, but we knew we could do some things. And so we got busy. And we got busy because I've spent my entire lifetime exploring the natural world. As a kid, being a paper boy, some of you may have been paper boys or girls when you were little. Back in the day, I was out in nature all the time, which was awesome by myself. Then I got out of college, I went home. I started looking, my first real foray into native plants was just looking for them along roadsides in Cass County, Iowa. If you've ever been in Cass County, Iowa, it's wall-to-wall corn and soybean fields. And so there were almost no natural areas in the entire county, which used to be 98% prairie, tall grass prairie. And so, but they got to a point where Iowa couldn't afford to be mowing the roads all the time, roadside ditches all the time, and all of a sudden the prairie came back. And I saw stuff in some of those roadside ditches. I went to give a presentation one time at a ladies' garden club out in the country, the Pellets House. And I showed them all these beautiful flowers I'd found over the first couple of years. And I got done and somebody raised their hand. Those plants are not here. I said, yes, they are. And they said, no, they're not here. There's none of those around here. I said, I tell you what, railroad track's about a quarter of a mile down the road. Let's go down there and walk the railroad track. And I'll show you a whole bunch of them. I said, I just drove past them. So that's when my first introduction into native plants happened, my first job as a county naturalist. And then my second job, I started growing. I went to a nature center in Minnesota, and I started growing plants in a greenhouse. The greenhouse was used for a plant class for third graders. And we grew spiderwort, or no, what's that hanging? It's the thing with the babies that hang, a long green strap. Spider plant and wandering Jew, or whatever you call it now, I don't know. That's what we called it. And all of these non-native things, because we would take cuttings and the kids would come back the second time and they would see their plant grew and all that. Well, slowly, by the time before I left there, I'd converted the entire thing to native plants, much to Mr. Johnson's chagrin. But, and then we ended up actually bringing kids out and took those baby plants that we learned to grow from just doing it and created a prairie outside one of the buildings. Now, prairie is very broadly used there, but it worked. But and here's one of the other lessons I had. We had kids going out there. These were middle school kids. They were putting the seedlings upside down in the hole because they'd never done it before. They had really true, and that was a very valuable lesson when it comes to teaching. And then I started using native plants at my home in Nebraska when I went to a nature center and worked there. I used New England aster. Oh my God, it's the best plant ever. Doesn't grow down here, but it's a fantastic wildflower, and monarchs would just migrate and stop by the hundreds. So that was my first actual putting them into the ground of my own property. And then for several years I was living in an apartment, so there was not a whole lot I could do, except learn and read and try to figure out what's going on out there. And then from this time, when I went to Guadalupe River State Park, we actually started a garden down there with native plants, much to the chagrin of the park staff and most of the park uppers. They didn't want us doing that, but we did it for an educational garden. It's still there today. And I know now it's been accepted because they actually put an interpretive sign in the middle of it. So I know it's not going anywhere soon, just like they're doing out here and have been doing here for so many, many years. And then started delivering a lot of programs on these kinds of topics and that kind of thing. And then when we bought the house, started applying all of that, and I had a fork and a bunch of ground with grass in it, and I put the fork in the ground and started turning it all over and started changing the lawn. And so some of the things that I thought about before I put that pitch into that fork into the ground, when I wanted to know, what are we going to do? If I'm going to put in native plants, why? Am I just doing it because I can say I put in native plants? Am I doing it to attract pollinators? And my goal was, let's diversify our yard and let's see what comes. You plant it, they will come, right? So I looked at things and learned things about, and some of these books that are up here have this information in it. Floral density, how many plants of each species, instead of, I'm going to buy one Flamicanthus and I'm going to put it here and I'm happy. Well, it's not going to get to reproduce with any other Flamicanthus, so you're going to produce seeds, maybe, maybe not. You're not going to have a lot of diversity. But if I put 10 of them in that space, then just look out there, perfect example. I'm going to create more flowers for more pollinators to visit. I'm going to keep the genetic mix going on with that as well. Species richness, how many species am I going to have? I've probably tried 200 different species in our yard. I'm not going to tell you today there's 200 there because some of them liked it and some of them said, no, I'm out, and left. Flower morphology, it turns out that corolla length based off research is actually a major consideration when you're putting in native plants. Most of our native pollinators have very short tongues. So if you're going to put in something with a long, like a penstemon or a honeysuckle, that's great for those, the big moths, the hummingbird moths and the hummingbirds and those kind of things. But a lot of the other insects aren't going to visit those because their tongue's too small. Unless they're like some kinds of, like I got video the other day of a carpenter bee going to the base of the honeysuckle flower and chewing a hole in it and stealing the nectar without doing anything to pollinate anything. So there are those that do that. So what I tried to do, one of my major things was how many different kinds of flowers could I put in? How many different depths of the flower are they to try to accommodate as many different species of pollinator as possible? So so the steps that I used is, what do you already have? If you're getting ready to do something on a plot of land, first of all, find out what you got. You may actually have some native plants that either you don't know are native plants or that are actually valuable. So two of them that are actually pretty valuable that a lot of yards and places have is straggler daisy and frog fruit. They're low growers. Some people think they're weedy, but in the springtime, when there's nothing else blooming, you'll notice a lot of tiny little pollinators all over those tiny little flowers. So those can be important. But making some kind of an inventory, focus on the native plants and pollinators. Obviously, I wanted to select the diversity of composites. If I was going to plant nothing else, I'd plant composites because each head has lots of little flowers on it with shallow tubes, so everybody can visit those flowers. I selected tubular flowers for pollinators with long tongues. Again, picking different species so I have different flower colors to diversify, just like you would any garden. Select flowers that provide nectar sources in different seasons. So one of the things I try to do is make sure that when everything starts to bloom in February or late January, I have things blooming all the way into December before everything goes brown. And I've been able to do that. This spring, there were 2 or 3 weeks where I had more than 50 species of things blooming in that little yard. Yesterday I counted them. I had 34 species blooming in the front yard and 15, I think, in the backyard. Okay, now there was overlap between the front and the back. It's not that far away, but still. Select plants for different heights. Select plants that have a dual purpose. There's a couple of really good books for Texas. One's called Native Host Plants for Texas Moths. This is by Jim Weber and Lynn Weber. Fantastic resource. Oh, very good. Thank you. I'll get my cut later. And then Native Host Plants for Texas Butterflies by the same authors. Fantastic resources. And you might go, why moths? Who cares? Moths are critical to bird populations. They're critical to pollination, especially for night blooming flowers. Select woody plants that benefit pollinators. Also avoid pesticides and insecticides at all cost. It doesn't do any of those native plants. They don't need it. They don't want it. It's just like overwatering native plants. And our native plants here are adapted to these crazy climates that we have, shifts. And for the most part, they do pretty well. All right, so what I was trying to do, when we think about pollinators, we think about bees, and we think about bees, and we think about bees. But all of these other things are pollinators as well. In fact, beetles are thought to have originally probably been the first pollinators on Earth. Wasps are just hairless bees. Wasps arose first, and then bees came after them evolutionarily. So a bee is just a hairy wasp. But flies and moths and all of these guys do amazing jobs of pollinating. So I wanted to try to attract as many of these different pollinators. Notice I don't have hummingbirds up there, but obviously I was going to try to attract them as well. So then the question becomes, where do you get them? Where do you get the native plants? There are plants, there's one right down the road that sell a couple of them, Medina, and then, thanks you, Texas natives sell native plants. There are native plant sales that I know are operated right out of this nature center. You can do plant rescues if you know a place is going to get torn up. One of the things I used to do is drive around Bernie, and I'd see these motels or places like that where they were constantly mowing, and I'd see native wildflowers blooming in the yard, and I'd pull off. I always had my little shovel with me, and sometimes Terry was with me, and we'd go out. One time I ran into a guy that was mowing, and I walked out, and and he didn't speak English. I held up my fork, and I said, I just wanted, and so I got down there, and he just watched me like, what is he doing? And that's how I got evening primrose, or pink evening primrose in my yard from digging it out. He was just going to mow it over, so why not take it? Collecting seeds from native plants in roadsides and fields. There's questions, is it legal, is it not legal? A couple of things to remember when you're collecting seeds. Don't take them all, okay? But also know that in a wild setting, most of those seeds never produce a plant because the ground is already infiltrated with roots and the plants, including the parents. And the competition is so massive that if you take a few seeds, you're not hurting anybody, okay? And then also I had to remind myself that in order to pick those seeds in July or May or August, they had to go through some kind of winter stratification. In nature, those seeds fall to the ground. It gets cold, they get wet, and they go through several weeks of that kind of seasoning, if you will. And then when spring comes, they're ready to go. So I would collect those in. I'd put them in baggies. I'd put them with a little bit of wet sand, not soaked, but wet sand. Throw them in the refrigerator. I had a drawer in our refrigerator that Terry allowed me to use. All my seeds go in there. I would take them out, and within days they were germinating in my flats. So you have to know a little bit about that. And there are some great resources out there for that. There's this How to Grow Native Plants. I know the library here has a couple of copies of this. And most of this is woody plants, but a lot of good information. There's a couple of books that focus on the tallgrass prairie, but show seedlings and seeds of different kinds of plants, and a lot of ours are related to those, if not the same thing. And then the plant that I really loved, or book I really loved, was Restoring the Tallgrass Prairie by somebody with the name Shirley Shirley. She married somebody with the last name of Shirley. But the reason she wrote this book is because she was on a bicycle and got hit and was paralyzed, and wrote this massive tome, compared to some books, but a fantastic book on that's how I learned how to grow plants. She tells you how to treat every species, just like the How to Grow Native Plants book here in Texas and the surrounding area. So those are great sources. The other thing about buying this house was it came with a greenhouse. So as soon as I walked into the backyard and saw the greenhouse, I told Terry, we have to have this house. And it's worked out really well. When we bought it, the pieces of wood, the framing was all actual 2x2 lumber. Unfortunately, it was all rotted. So over the course of one summer, her nephew came and we disassembled that, which I wouldn't recommend very often, and rebuilt it. But now every slat has a leak because now 2x2s are not 2x2s. And I wasn't going to replace all those little plastic things. But that little greenhouse has probably grown 30 or 40,000 plants over the last 5 or 6 years. And now you're going to wonder, where did you put 30 or 40,000 plants? They're all over. I've given them away to lots of people. But what I did is I went nuts. That's one spring with all my flats of seeds that I overwintered, and they're ready to go. Somebody looked at that picture one time and said, "You look a little crazy." I thought, well, that was a compliment. So that's what I did. And of course, so wait a minute. So I started growing them. I started learning how to recognize the seedlings as they germinated, started growing them up. You go from the little flats to the little pots to the bigger pots, and then you go, oh my God, what am I going to do with all these? We could have brought about 60 of those things today to give away. I should have thought of that, Terry. And then I decided, well, we need more space, so we bought a potting bench, and I used the tables that I had, put some plants on there, and then I took our picnic table and turned it into that because we needed more space. And then I built 3 of these, rolling carts and put soil in there to grow things because I needed more space. And then I went to the neighbor's yard and I asked her if we could use her old garden bed and filled those 2 things up. Each one of those is 17 feet and the other one's 19 feet long and about 8 feet across. So we've grown a few plants. So I'm not saying you need to do this, but I'm just saying, if you had a little greenhouse, imagine what you could do. I took it pretty seriously. So we started growing plants. We bought the house in 18. We went in the spring. I thought, okay, what am I going to do? We dug out all the non-native plants, and Terry's got stories about how amazing it is to get rid of these non-native plants by just throwing them on the street, and people were fighting over them. I took that little part of the yard, and I took my fork and I started turning over the sod to get rid of all of the St. Augustine grass. And now what I want to do is share with you what happened over the last 5 or 6 years. Eventually, this is a Google map. This shows our house kind of distorted, but these are the different garden plots that we put in the measurement. So I put in the front yard about 1,114 square feet roughly, and 1,131 square feet in the backyard, plus a few other little side beds here and there. So not a lot of garden space, but we packed it full. And we did it one at a time, and we learned a lot, especially me, along the way. One of the nice things is we put a picket fence around the front yard. The backyard was already fenced. Picket fence around the front yard. Not one deer has ever jumped that fence. And we got white-tailed deer and axis deer everywhere. They've never come into the yard. And I don't know why. Our little dog's about like this. But never have. We took 2 beds outside the front of the yard, and we used plants like lantana and mealy blue sage and a few other things, and the deer don't eat them at all. So if you know what they don't eat, use those to take advantage of that fact. Because it is frustrating putting a lot of native plants, and it's like candy for the white-tailed deer. The biggest problem with native plants in the United States and doing this kind of gardening is white-tailed deer. And it's not just here in Texas, it's all the way across the country. Because if you don't put a fence around it, the deer are going to have it. We have too many white-tailed deer across the continent, really. So now you'll find that we have all this stuff. These are all the woody plants. I'm not going to go through them all, but let's just say there's some diversity. Okay? We did native shrubs and trees to try again to create a shrub layer first, to create an understory. And the reason we did that is because I wanted birds. I had all those pecan trees. There's a couple of different species of moths that go crazy on pecan trees, but all the warblers and all the other birds that were migrating through, none of them were stopping because there was no place to hide. So by putting in those native shrubs and trees, it started to build those different layers that we needed. The vines added floral creativity, if you will, and have been really, really nice. We've actually used the coral honeysuckle as living fences to kind of block off our backyard from prying neighbors, although our neighbors are lovely. Right now we've got about 100 native, I think I counted 99 species that are in our yard, native forbs, from all these different plant families. We have native grasses. One of the things you find out is a lot of things depend on grasses. The skippers, the little tiny butterflies, and most of them lay their eggs on native grasses. So we try to diversify that as best we can. Here are a few examples of what we've had in the yard. And when I say native plants, I will say that plant in the upper left-hand corner is called Gulf penstemon. Beautiful plant in the spring. Grows along the Gulf Coast. So when I say native, I used to be hardcore. It's like, if it's not native within 100 miles, then it's not native to this area. I've kind of cheated that a little. But that's okay. But you can see lots of diversity in color and shape and size of the flowers, time of the year. Here's some more examples of different things there. And not all of these attract the same pollinators to them. Okay, so if you take basket flower here, this guy right here is going to attract large butterflies, especially the swallowtails. It attracts Bumblebees especially, really good for that. This one's going to attract a wide variety of things. The coneflower, all of this works out really well. And then I put together a little list of must-haves that I wanted to share with you, and this is for this area. I think if I were forced to choose one plant to grow, and I could not choose anything else, it would be Mealy blue sage. The Mealy blue sage up in that upper left-hand corner. The deer don't eat it most of the time. I'm saying if the drought's bad enough, they'll eat anything, right? But Mealy blue sage is left alone. It blooms from spring all the way through fall, so it blooms multiple times. You can cut back you can deadhead it and get more growth. It grows out from the roots a little bit, so it fills in an area very nicely. And every pollinator that I know have hit my yard at one point or another has been on Mealy blue sage. If there was a second choice of only one other thing that was a woody plant, it would be shrubby boneset. Fantastic flowering plant. When it's blooming on an evening in the fall and you walk out, the scent will knock you over. And I've sat, Terry knows this, we found a chair at was it at one of those used stores? Thrift store chair that spun around. Had 4 legs and a little chair and just spun around. So I put that in the middle of my garden and I could just taking pictures. And I would sit out there for hours taking pictures just on the shrubby boneset. It's an amazing shrub. And then always have a milkweed of some kind. I've actually found my best luck is growing Texas milkweed. A lot of the milkweeds are hard to germinate and hard to survive. These guys, I had, I think, 94 seedlings and 92 of them germinated. And they've done really well. Plus, it's an unusual native, and it is used by the queens in the summertime. Not so much monarchs because they're not here when these guys are growing. Cowpen daisy would be one of my all-time favorites. It's an annual. It does get weedy. It can get weedy. But it also, over the 4 or 5 years, when we first started our garden, cowpen was everywhere. And I think if Terry admitted it, she thought there might have been too much. But the nice thing is it's kind of slowed down. Annuals kind of peter out as other things get established. But we still have it, still love it. Starts blooming now, blooms all the way through fall, including when the monarchs are migrating through and need that food. Its relative is frostweed. Fantastic perennial plant. Grows in the shade, grows in the sun. Problem with frostweed is when it gets to be about this tall and then it turns hot in August, all the bottom leaves start dying and the plant looks like death warmed over. But then we get a little rain and it produces all those white flowers and the monarchs, again, love it, and migration. And then in the springtime, a lot of you, I don't know how many of you know this plant, Texas prairie parsley. It grows in our roadside ditches every spring. When I pull up to the, pull off of I-10 here at the Kerrville exit, that roadside ditch usually has a bunch of prairie parsley. It has a massive root system. It takes 2 or 3 years to get it established. Beautiful springtime, early springtime plant, and every small pollinator that needs tiny little yellowish flowers, needs that nectar and pollen, goes to that plant. And that's another one. I can literally sit for an hour and photograph pollinators, wasps and bees using it in particular. So those are my 6 that I really, really have learned to love over time. Yes?
I read an article just in the last week where somebody was talking about cutting back a bunch of the plants right now so you got a better bloom later on. And they specifically mentioned frostweed. I've never heard of cutting frostweed back. Have you?
No, I never have. And we've done it accidentally a few times, but then it kind of suckers out, kind of like a blazing star does the same thing. When you cut it off, it tends to then get lots of little suckers. Doesn't look that good, I don't think. I would not recommend cutting it back. You know, I really wouldn't. I will say, though, if you're going to use frostweed, once you got it in the ground, good luck digging it out. And it does spread. Okay, some of these spread. Boneset doesn't spread. Mealy blue sage spreads slightly. Prairie parsley, not so much, even though it produces mass quantities of really neat seeds. Cowpen, of course, can, and shrubby boneset doesn't. Milkweeds are pretty slow about it, too. I'm not a big believer in cutting the plants back. I kind of look at, the way I look at my native plants in my yard is that I try to mimic what nature's doing. Okay, nature's not going out there and, you know, there's not little crews out there going, okay, we're going to trim these off here and so we can get a second flower or a third flower or whatever. They'll do their thing. If there's rain, they'll do their thing and they'll do fine that way. So I would, And frostweed usually only blooms once a year, and that's in the fall. I don't think that's going to enhance bloom period or anything. Now there may be, like if you took mealy blue sage when it's done flowering the first time, all those dead little seed heads are there. You kind of go, oh God, I should trim these up because it looks a little sloppy. But you give it a couple of weeks and a whole new set of flowers, and then those things disappear and you don't even notice they were there. So again, I try to mimic nature as best I can in an artificial setting. So the other thing I did when we started this project is I started my own iNaturalist project. And this was as of yesterday, 688 species, okay, in a yard that is pretty darn small. That's of everything. And now some of those are the plants that I put in, so they're not, you know, truly just didn't pop up in my yard. Although my neighbors are now getting to experience some of my native plants as they're spreading, which we both enjoy seeing. And in fact, our one neighbor who, when we first moved in, was like, what is he doing? She now has pink prairie or pink evening primrose in her yard, and she had her grandson mow around it. So that was good. So, all right, so that's a big project. We also, just to kind of break that down a little bit, of Hymenoptera, the bees, wasps, and ants, and I'm mostly talking bees and wasps, but I don't take pictures of ants because I don't know what the heck they are other than ants. 53 species, plus others that can't be named as species, because most of them can't. So a lot of diversity. And what I was shocked by was, A, this plant right here, which is a great annual. If you're a beekeeper, you don't like this plant because it taints the honey, the nectar that comes from it, makes it a little bitter. But every wasp in God's green earth was on these plants when they were blooming. And all of these wasps, by the way, none of them, well, except that one, I didn't worry about any of them stinging me. Okay, that's not what they're out there looking for you know. But they're feeding on nectar, but they're going and looking for other insects to stab and lay their egg in and paralyze them and let their larvae feed off of those caterpillars. So the things like June beetles that are underground as larvae, you know, eating on your roots and whatnot. There's this guy, is it this guy? This guy right here. She goes to the ground, puts her antenna on the ground and feels for vibrations of those bugs underneath the soil, and then digs down through and finds them, lays an egg, paralyzes it, and crawls out and goes finds another one.
What plant is that?
This is called Snow on the Mountain. Yeah, beautiful plant in August when nothing else is usually blooming. This thing is blooming. It's an annual. It can spread, but again, it's one of those first couple of years they're everywhere, and then all of a sudden they kind of whittle their way down, which is what annuals do. They like disturbed soil. So that's Hymenoptera. And then we had, in terms of Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, we've had at least 153 species. Now the bulk of them are moths. And that's just a small sample of what is flying around your yard at night, okay? Really, really valuable. And not just as the adult stage, but as the caterpillar stage. Because if you don't have caterpillars, you don't have baby birds. Okay, so there's people that come out and they spray their trees to get rid of the caterpillars and stuff. They're actually shrinking their bird population. They may not know it, but they are. Okay, so baby bluebirds, large sparrows, great crested flycatcher. Those two have not nested in our yard, by the way. These guys have nested in the neighborhood. But the key is right there. So when people say, I want to have birds in my yard, bird feeders are great for certain species. But native plants with the pollinators coming to them are even a better fix because you get more species. The warblers and the vireos, the bluebirds, the great crested flycatchers, those things that feed on insects their entire life. Okay, so that's really valuable. I also added to attract birds, I added some water, and this is this is our second or third attempt at this. These rocks were actually laying around in the yard. Those were the only rocks that were in the yard other than the deck. Those rocks. So we piled them up, got a couple of little those plastic feed troughs, buried them in the ground, ran a tube through there, put a little filter thing, pump thing in them to attract the birds. This is what it looks like yesterday. So this is great, but there's not much cover. So if you're going to use water, have cover nearby. So what we did is started growing cover. So I've got back here, I've got indigo bush. We've got Mexican buckeye over here. We've got elderberry here. We've got ironweed here, Turk's cap here. We've got a plant called tall white aster growing around this old well site right here, and it's worked really, really well. And so this is what it first looked like. Not a whole lot of cover, but what was really cool is watch. Does anybody know what that bird is? Yeah, how many western tanagers did you see around here? Like almost none. So it showed up in the yard one day because we had a little water. We've had all kinds of weird warblers show up, just that little bit of running water, and it could come in here, get a drink, and now wait for it. Here comes a robin. This is when you realize how big a robin is. And he comes down here and just decides to take over, throw the old pecan flowers out of the way, take a bath, get a drink, and then, let's see here, and chase him away. So anyway, that's what the water can do. Oh, and by the way, it's also attracted just an unbelievable, wait a minute, that's not the right slide. There we go. It's attracted a whole bunch of other birds. Terry, I thought you had me take that out, but I guess I forgot. So, anyway, I'm glad you caught on that quick. I did this for one audience, and they're like, really? No, not really. So we've got all kinds of birds. Over 80 species of birds have showed up in my yard. Now, granted, we have Cibolo Creek across the way. That doesn't hurt, right? But the birds that I'm seeing have come either from the creek or wherever. We used to have, in the springtime, we would have 10 to 15 painted buntings and indigo buntings in the backyard, of course, eating seed, but still, we had them. Pretty impressive. So we've really been able to diversify our bird life, and it's gotten to the point where now that little pond is becoming its own ecosystem where this neon skimmer is laying eggs. And then frogs and toads move into the yard, and it's pretty amazing.
Do you have trouble with raccoons or anything getting into your water features?
We don't.
No?
We've put cameras on there, and we don't. It's amazing. I don't know why, because every once in a while they try to get into our cans that have bird seed in it. They don't even bother our bird feeders, and we know they're in the neighborhood. It's just amazing. I don't know why that is. To me, that's really unusual, but I'll take it. So just to give you some comparison, here's our house when we first bought it. Here's the front yard. Here's one corner of the front yard. That bush right there is a shrubby bone set. Never been trimmed, so it's looking lovely. And now it's gotten to the point where birds go in here, and at some point there's going to be a pair of cardinals nest in that bush. I just know it. If I can keep away the feral cats. That's the trick. So here's this side of the yard. This is what it looks like now. We've got a red bud right there that's fantastic. The deer will sometimes come up and eat the flowers. And here's what's really cool. You know that whole thing planted and they will come? The red bud is a host plant for a little tiny butterfly called the Henry's elephant. Only time they are around is in the early spring. They emerge as adults in the spring. They come find this or Mexican buckeye, which of course is not really a buckeye. But they come and they lay their eggs on this plant. And so one year I was looking around, or this spring I was looking around, and for the first time I saw Henry's elephant on this plant. And a couple weeks later I found a pink caterpillar of the Henry's elephant. Because when the Henry's elephant caterpillar feeds on flowers that are pink, its skin is pink. Its exoskeleton is pink. When it feeds on the leaves, it's green. So there you go. I was so thrilled. I would never have guessed I could have actually had that happen. But it did happen. Here's what it looks like outside our front door back in 2018-19. Here's kind of what it looks like now. Just to kind of show you that, what I do here. Okay, here's the front yard inside the picket fence from one end to the other. We've tried a lot of things here, but we got a lot of dense shade. So last year I grew a bunch of rock roses, and this is going to be an entire bed of rock rose with right there, pretty faded out beautyberry that we just transplanted in there. And then we've got flameleaf sumac one in there. By the way, if you plant one flameleaf sumac, give it a couple years. Not only will you find more, you'll find them 50 yards away from where the original one was. They send underground suckers everywhere. I'm just learning that. So, native, no, I wouldn't say that. But just keep in mind, when you take native plants out of their actual habitat and you throw them into an artificial place, they can become weedy just like any weed can, right? Because they don't have all the natural competition. But this has become a real shrub-based garden bed. Birds love it, especially in the wintertime, where places to hide. Here's the front of the house with Liriope? Liriope, thank you. Tells you how much I don't know about those. Oh wait, where'd that picture go? Oh, somehow it escaped. That's all the garden beds now. This is that first section that we dug when we started the project. It has evolved tremendously over the last 5 years. Some plants that were there the first years are now gone, but this is what it looks like. This is, we had a realtor come out and look at our house to try to get an idea of what it might be worth. And the first thing I don't know the first thing, because thank God I wasn't there. Terry was talking to her and she said, you need to get rid of the weeds. And we'll bring in some pots with pretty flowers. It's a good thing I wasn't there.
You don't have an HOA.
We do not have an HOA, yes. And here's the deal. People are living with HOAs that have all these restrictions. Change it. Change it. Okay? Get on the board. You know, just because there's some people that want to have everything spiffy to the nth degree. No. I mean, you guys live in Texas. People don't tell you what to do they?
No.
You should. That's what I thought about being a Texan was. In Iowa, we just
That's
go,
why you really can't
okay.
leave, right?
Well,
That's why you really are not leaving.
well, you know. So here's the backyard original. Here's the side of the backyard. Now it looks like this. Here's this little section of garden. Now looks like this. Here's a view from the back of the backyard. Hopefully it worked. Well, it didn't. I don't know where that picture went. But here's what the old backyard looked like, and there's what it looks like now. So again, remember I said we did leave some lawn because we have a dog, you know. But what I've got now is a shrub layer. I'm starting to get an understory, okay. So but it is a process. It takes time. And here's what our yard looks like now when you pull up to it, okay. And on either side of it, biological desert, okay. But at least here's a tiny little oasis. And the cool thing is if more and more of us did this, think of the difference we could make for the natural world. There's talk in Washington, D.C. that they're going to sell off 1 million acres of public land in the Rocky Mountains area. That's 1 million acres that probably is not going to be helping wildlife if they actually do that. They're not selling it off because they, you know, and I don't want to get into politics, but that's our land. And they're talking about giving it to whoever can develop it the fastest. I prefer that and that's why these little things like this make a big difference. And so what I would encourage you to do is go to the NIPSOT website. They've got great resources for what do you look for, where can you get them, how to plant them, what they're good for, the whole 9 yards. Native Plant Society of Texas's website is fantastic. This was redeveloped, I think, within the last 2 years. It's just a fantastic place. You can go to the Xerxes Society. They just put out this publication, Pollinator-Friendly Parks. I know that Kerrville is now Bird City, USA. This would be a great resource for tapping into that to find out. And they also have regional guides, planting guides, and all of that. They've worked with Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center to help us out here in Texas. So a great organization for doing that. Plus they have a great podcast. And then of course you can go to the Lady Bird Wildflower Center. This is a link from Xerxes Society to this webpage. Great resources we have right here in Texas to help us out. And then there's this whole idea, how many of you have listened to Douglas Tellamy or read one of his books? Unbelievable. You can register your yards and put a little nature in it, whether it's some plants in pots or planters, or if it's a yard like mine. You can register that with them to see. We could literally build a national park with habitat all over the country just using our yards. Okay? And the government couldn't tell us what to do. So, for example, right now there's only 106,782.7 acres across the United States. I say only because there's a whole lot more land than that. But it's a start. You got to start somewhere, right? In Texas, we've got about almost 2,700 acres that have been put into this program or just been listed there. Again, there's no obligation. You're just listing it. And then I looked at Kerrville, and there's even a few places that are on the list in Kerrville. However, there's one place that should be somewhere up in here.
And I don't know why it doesn't show up on the map, because I
Have you listened? Okay. I wasn't going to try and put too much pressure on you, but I thought, hey, it should be on there. And maybe I didn't zoom it in enough. Who knows? You know. But anyway, so we can do this. We can actually make a positive difference for pollinators and for birds and various things like that. We just have to have the will to do it. So in the end, this journey might only matter to us and those insects and frogs and toads and birds and plants that have been invited to our yard. In the end, the next person that buys our home may look at what we've done and rip out everything, taking the yard back to the biological desert like those of my neighbors and so many others. But in the end, we will know that we will have done what we could to make a positive difference for the natural world for a short while, and that perhaps our efforts will spur others to consider the benefits of planting native plants and welcome bees and butterflies and birds to the space where they call home. And through our efforts, we can then truly read this quote by the Lorax and know we tried. And I've used this graphic so many times in presentations, but when you do this kind of thing, it makes you feel like you're actually doing something to make a difference. And again, it doesn't have to be a big, giant, colossal thing. Ours certainly isn't. And you don't have to go quite as crazy as I have. But it does make a difference. You saw that on the iNaturalist project, 688 species of things. Okay, if you take out the plants, it's about 450 plants, or species of animals that have come to our yard because of what we've done. So, that's what I have for presentation. I do have some books up here. Talamy's written a couple of excellent books. He's got one on oaks. He's got Bringing Nature Home. This one, Nature's Best Hope, is really a really great read if you want to learn more. And one of the things that I'm a massive user of books, as my wife can attest, in our library of 500 different books that are all nature-based. There's a lot of information out there, and it's not hard to find. And now with all these wonderful websites, a few of which I shared with you, there's all kinds of opportunities to do what you can to make a difference. And I know one of the challenges of the career that I've had is that I've spent most of my career talking to the already converted. Okay, and the challenge with that is, if we just keep talking to ourselves and we don't spread beyond that, are we really making much of a difference long term? And we're not. The reality is we're not. Okay, I was in environmental education one way or the other for 45 years. Some days I wonder if I made any difference at all, because I wasn't the only one out there doing it, right? So you have to be the messengers to take this kind of message and show your neighbors and expose them to the possibilities of that kind of thing. And so if we can slowly build out from this little pool of people that love nature and all of that, that's when we really know we're going to make a difference. So support places like this, because they are trying to make a difference. Cibolo Nature Center down in Bernie. For towns the size of Kerrville and Cibolo and Bernie to have a nature center within their boundaries is pretty unusual. You can go to a lot of other towns with 6 or 8 or 10,000 people, and they don't have anything like this. So the more we can expose people to these places and get them on board and bring them into the fold, the better off we are. And so I applaud any of you. I know you obviously work out here doing stuff, and it looks spectacular. I love it. Keep doing those kind of things, but reach out beyond your little, circle or interest and try to, at least expose people to them. And, they may look at it and go, oh, that looks like a lot of work. Well, so is mowing and hedging and using that little trimmer thing along the curb. And this is a lot more peaceful. It's quiet. You get dirt under your fingernails. Soil. Dirt is a 4-letter word for soil. And some people don't like bugs, but you know what? Then they shouldn't shop at a grocery store. No fruits for them. Right? And Doug Tallamy said, I listened to him on a podcast recently, and he said, nature education for kids is really important and really essential, but guess what? They're not the decision makers. And for us as adults to go, you know what, it's up to the kids to save the world. No, it's not. Because by the time, and I've watched generations, my children, her children, my children's children now, they don't have a vote. We have votes. We are the decision makers for what's going to happen 20 years from now. And if we abdicate by writing off everything and going, yeah, we'll give it to the kids, then we're not being very good stewards of our environment. And that is just the harsh reality. And so we have to educate the adults around us, the people that make the decisions, whether it's taking care, how you take care of a yard, what they sell in a store for plants, or whatever it happens to be. We can make a positive difference. And so I encourage all of you, if you have already done some of this, great, keep it up, keep it up. And just, our yard is just slowly, the gardens are going this way and the grass is going this way. But it's a process. And the great thing is nature is fantastic and there's always things to discover. And if you have put in native plants, spend some time with them. Develop what I like to call an intimate relationship with your yard or your property. Who's there? You got all kinds of neighbors, right? You don't have to argue with them. You just get to sit and enjoy them, So anyway, that's what I've got. I know there were questions about bird feeders. We can still talk about that.
Question, comment,
Yeah.
related to all that. I noticed you had a lot of the signs on the front.
Oh, yes, of course,
Well, it helps
promotion.
in initiating those conversations
Yes.
with your neighbors, because I have a prairie garden, a native garden that I'm working on, and I got the pollinator recognized sign, and now I'm working there and there's a sign, and people will stop and look at it and talk to me about
Yep.
it. And so it's not even me having to grab them, they see it, and I'm there, and there's a sign.
Yep.
And I think that opens that conversation.
Absolutely
for all
does.
neighbors,
It
right?
does.
It's
As
a lot
long as they don't
less
think it's a
fun.
for sale sign,
Right.
which we've had a few people think they're for
I'm
sale
just
sign.
saying, so getting those, yeah.
But that's a big deal.
Signs also help with when we were first doing things, and it was pretty pollinator garden looking. I have a little landscaper knock on my door and say, I can help you with your yard. Or you have a pest control company saying, do you want your yard sprayed?
Yeah, right. But
Lecture.
that really is a good point. Those signs matter, and they usually have to pay for them, or else if you're in the if the PGARP folks that are around here, you get the sign, But that's okay. It is a great way to start a conversation. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, ma'am.
What about snakes?
The only snakes I've ever seen in my little tiny yard are the blind snakes in the soil, when I'm digging in the soil, and I think I had a ground